Hey everybody, and welcome to That Triathlon Show, where I'm joined here today by Jim Vance. Jim is the head coach and founder of Formula Endurance, which is a high-performance triathlon team focused on developing elite and junior triathletes in the USA. He's also the author of the two books, Triathlon 2.0 and Run with Power, and the co-editor of the book, uh, Science of Triathlon. So Jim has a long experience in triathlon, both as a pro athlete himself and as a coach, and now an author as well. And Jim, welcome to the show, and feel free to fill in any gaps from that intro.
Sure, thanks for having me. I think that's pretty good. I coach swimming as well. I'm the head coach of a big high school swim program here called Coronado High School. I'm sure a lot of people around the world probably heard of Coronado. It's a beautiful place, and yeah, it's good. I've had a lot of success in coaching swimming as well. So yeah, it's been a great run.
Yeah, and the topic of today's interview, or the main topic at least, is data-driven training, which is a topic that you cover in your book Triathlon 2.0. For those tuning in on video, I have a copy of it here. It looks like this. It's an excellent read. I highly recommend it. And so, yeah, the first question related to data-driven triathlon training is, what are the benefits of it? Can you give a brief definition of what you see data-driven training as, and what the benefits of it are?
Sure. Well, it's really a record of the truth of what's happening in training. You know, so many athletes, I tend to find, only think they're as good as their last workout sometimes, or their last race, and or really don't understand why they're doing certain training. Maybe training according to peer pressure, or certain things, or I mean, every athlete reaches a plateau at some point. They've reached a point where they are not going to get better if they continue with the stimulus they're on. And data just helps you really find what that point is and be able to make changes to adjust the training so that you can have that next breakthrough, or at least understand, hey, this is a time when you need to rest, or this is a time when you need to change the type of workouts you're doing. So that's really the benefit of it. I can tell you most people think that I'm just all about numbers and data, but really I would say my bias as a coach is in the mentality of my athletes. Being confident on the start line is probably the number one predictor of race performance. If the athlete is excited to race and on the start line, confident and pumped up, ready to go, they're likely to have a great race. And data is what I find helps eliminate all the subjectivity of training and makes it more objective, so athletes can see that they're successful, gain confidence from that, gain a sense of fulfillment from all the training they're doing. And that in the end is what I believe really leads to performance in races.
That's a good answer. And you mentioned there about breaking through plateaus. Using data is obviously one thing that you can benefit from. But is it also applicable for beginners that are just starting out in triathlon? Can they make a faster progress in the sport by using data compared to if they weren't to use it?
Sure. And I'm sorry about that. I think this misnomer that data is only for the elite or for the highly technical is clouding the use of data. Data doesn't necessarily have to come from a power meter. In the book, I talk about, we all have certain data points. How fast we run our neighborhood loop, that's a data point for you personally. A certain hill that you climb on your bike, you get the time from the bottom to the top of it, or something of that nature, something that's an objective marker for you. Those are the types of metrics that I find are still very valid data points for athletes. And if those data points continue to improve, then athletes can be very successful. It doesn't necessarily have to be the latest power meter or sleep monitor or something crazy like that. It can be very simple data, but certainly taking some sort of data and objective measurement to see how you're progressing is the key.
That's a very good point, that it doesn't have to be anything more than those simple data points that we're so used to. There's, I guess, a reason for it. They've been around for a long time, and they're proven to be effective. Like just times around the loop is excellent.
Test sets in the pool.
Yep.
You know, if you're swimming in the same pool all the time and you're getting faster, well, that's great. If you're not getting faster, that's when you got to stop. You got to say, okay, why am I not improving? And that's really what the book does. The book is all about, hey, here's some ways to monitor your progress. And if you're not seeing certain trends, then it's time to stop, reassess your plan and your focus.
And one other thing that you mentioned in your book is that some coaches seem to be biased towards really old school training and not really adopt a data-driven mindset at all. And you mentioned that they might get left behind sooner rather than later. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Sure. What I tend to find are coaches that reject any type of data tend to be the ones who want athletes to believe that there's a magic formula and only they have it. They want there to be some type of mystery. They don't want them to figure it out. And I tend to find, quite honestly, they don't like accountability, because if the data shows that the athlete is not improving, well, and the athlete goes out and has a poor race, well, the coach can easily say, if there's no data, well, you just raced poorly. You didn't do it right. It's like, well, no, we can look at the training and show that the training really didn't prepare them properly. So I would say beware of the coach that resists all data.
Okay, that's a good tip for everybody who's coached then. Yeah, excellent. So moving on to the different disciplines, swimming, biking, and running, what data points and things do you look at in the three disciplines? What's important, what's not so important that some triathletes might still be collecting right now for their data analysis?
Well, the data that's critical to you is all based on your goals. You know, if you want to finish an Ironman, that's the data and what thresholds within those metrics need to be met are a lot different if you're a finisher versus if you want to win the race. So everything is goals oriented. You've got to understand, okay, am I a 40-year-old female trying to make the 70.3 worlds? Am I a 60-year-old male trying to make Kona? Am I a 23-year-old trying to become an elite? So those, all those things affect what data is most important and why. The test set that you need in the pool to be competitive in an elite race is a lot different than the test set you need in the pool just to prove that you can break the cutoff. So those are the types of things that I think people really need to understand. What are my goals, and what tests or what metrics are important to me to achieve those goals? Is it threshold power? Is it 3-hour power? Is it simply for some athletes it's mass? What's their mass? Their mass needs to come down, and that will help them a lot. That's the most important metric to maybe look at in their training. So though, like I say, it all comes back to goals. It doesn't really matter. There's not one swim test I do. There's not one bike test that I do or run test. Everything is different. I coach a U.S. Olympian, Ben Canute, who was in Rio. The types of things we're doing and the test sets that we're creating are entirely based now upon the goals of the things we're working on in training. We want to continue to improve his run and his speed. So we're, the types of test sets that we're creating, we line up to match with what we think is important in those race demands. So that's a long-winded way of saying the data is only relative to your actual goals.
Okay, so is that something that you'd want to disclose or be able to disclose? What kind of data do you look at for Ben Canute? And then could you compare that to, say, an age grouper who has been doing triathlons for a couple of years and wants to break 2:30 for the Olympic distance for the first time?
Oh, well, somebody that wants to break 2:30 for the Olympic distance, I mean, that's also going to be course dependent. Are they wanting to do certain things. And what's their background? Are they a swimmer first? Are they not a swimmer? Are they a runner? Are they a cyclist? With Canute was a swimmer. So, and right now we're working a lot on his swimming. On his footwork. So actually, we're having him do one test that we're doing is a mile on the track. So we're going to track that and see how he's doing, and because we feel that that's correlated to him running a fast 5K. So that's just one example of the type of test set, and we'll continue to monitor that. He has done FTP tests. He's done some other types of tests that USA Triathlon wants us to do to monitor, and they can compare with some of the athletes they've seen and they know. So yeah, that's about what I can share.
All right, and can you also share how often you do those kinds of tests with somebody like Ben, and how often would you recommend a regular age grouper do tests? I guess it depends as well, but are there any ballpark numbers?
We do some different testing about every cycle, which lasts about 4 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks. So that I would say that it's more relative to timeline. And I mean, again, going back to the goals, if the goal is simply to lose mass, well, you can test every day. You can step on a scale and see how that's going. So certainly I think if you go in you want a decent amount of time. You can't make every workout a test workout because there has to be some type of recovery. So I do think, though, it's important to do that within every within every cycle or every so often.
Okay, so let's move on to some more advanced and in a way Training Peaks specific metrics that you talk a lot about in your book, but a lot of triathletes these days are using Training Peaks, especially the ones that are working with a coach. And just because it's a great software and there's so much that you can do with it. And one of the main pillars of Training Peaks is the performance management chart. Can you elaborate a bit on what the performance management chart is, and how it's based on training stress score? That's maybe the best place to start, and what you use it for.
So the PMC is basically a long-term, it's a big 10,000 foot view, or I guess that'd be about 3,000 meter view for all the metric listeners, where you can see training. You can see it as a whole. You can watch it develop. You can break it into phases and see the way intensity changes or the way load changes. And then one of the things we can also do is we can kind of highlight certain metrics within a PMC chart to see where the best performances happened relative to training. So the PMC, the CTL is the thing most people look at, and that's chronic training load. So all it says is what's the basic training stress that you're able to hold over a long period of time. If you've been able to hold a very large training stress over a long period of time, chances are you're pretty fit. Now, that doesn't guarantee fitness, because certainly you can reach a very high CTL, chronic training load, and overtrain yourself. So, and in the book, that's what I try to look at. I think so many athletes, especially as they train, they try to look at Ironman training or 70.3 training as volume. Like, it's all about volume. Well, that's not really the case. It's about performance. If more training was better, then whoever did the most training would win. The best Ironman athletes would be Ultraman athletes. The best Olympians would be Ironman guys. So, but that's not really how it works. So in Triathlon 2.0, I try to give athletes a sense of, and coaches, because it's for coaches as well, of understanding what the range is. What's a range of chronic training load that's good enough for an athlete, and then work on trying to get the best quality of training out of that load. So a PMC chart does that, and it monitors fatigue. You can kind of see how fatigue is based upon short-term training stress. Like if your long-term training stress of 6 weeks has been 70 TSS, training stress score as we call it, and then suddenly you have a 7-day period where your average is 100. Well, that's quite a bit large. That's quite large compared to what you're used to long term. So you can understand that the athlete would be fatigued. And then, of course, tapering and being prepared to perform your best is about minimizing or reducing fatigue, but while maintaining fitness. And the PMC chart helps you do that with what we call training stress balance.
Right. And when you talk about those ranges, can you give us some, for example, take Ironman as an example, what would as a mid-packer have as a goal range and somebody trying to qualify for Kona?
Well, again, that's going to be age and gender based and goals based. So, the type of training required by a 40-year-old male is a lot different than a 60-year-old female trying to make Kona. So, you have to take that into account. And also the individual athlete. Like if I come into the sport as a very strong cyclist, well, then the amount of cycling training I need to perform at a high level is different than an athlete who comes in mostly as a runner and now has to build their cycling, or a swimmer. And then you can interchange all those sports individually. So there are some, they're in the book. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I want to say it's anywhere from about 20 to 30% if you want to try to qualify for Kona and of a CTL relative to your functional threshold power on the bike if you're in that 30 to 40-year-old male range. So that's one example, but the book has a lot. And I'll be honest, I've had people email me and say, well, I didn't reach your thresholds and I made Kona. And I'm a 24-year-old male and I only reached 12 to 14% CTL relative to my functional threshold power. And so I'd say, okay, well, what's your functional threshold power on the bike? And they'd say, well, it's 330. I'm like, well, you're kind of an outlier. So not too many athletes have a 330 watt functional threshold power. So that becomes really important for people to understand. There's an individual part of this, and it assumes, even in the book, that you're competitive in the swim. If this is, if you're within this range, if you can't make the swim cutoff, it doesn't matter how, what your bike CTL is, you're not even going to get to the bike. So you have to keep those types of things in mind. If it's, and I don't really in the book discuss Olympic distance because there's just so much variance within courses, and types, and even the types of athletes relative to their goals. Are you trying to get to ITU Worlds? Well, what you can do. It's such a shorter race compared to 70.3 in Ironman that there really is no norm because you can train entirely differently.
And one thing that came to mind now that you mentioned the swim is that you suggest not using the swim, or that this the PMC for swimming doesn't really have much relevance because we don't really know too much about that yet. So it's better to focus on the run and the bike. So is that a correct understanding?
Yeah, I think swim technology in terms of using it to really define training stress is difficult. If you travel a lot and you're in different pools, one pool is not the same as another. Just even the temperature of the pool can be different. You can't say, well, I swam fast in this pool today, and then over in that pool, it could be a slower pool. If it's a shallow pool, it's that's hot versus a deeper pool that's at a good temperature, well, you're going to perform differently. How many people are in the pool in a small pool can affect how fast you swim, but it isn't necessarily reflective of the effort, because you get a lot of people in a shallow pool, that water moves around a lot, you face a lot more resistance. Open water, you can't really use open water because you've got currents. You could swim across the lake, and if it's in a strong wind against a current, well, you're probably going to swim pretty slow. So it's not really reflective of that.
Yeah. And one thing that you also spend a lot of time on in the book is how to use data to actually plan your race performance. So can you explain that a bit?
Oh, you mean tapering?
Well, I was actually referring to
okay.
to the TSS requirement for the bike, for example, and for the run as well. But yeah, you can go into tapering as well.
Sure. So, well, I mean, you can once you have a taper that's successful, you can go back and look at that and define it down to a number in your training stress balance to know exactly what was I at on that day when everything clicked right. And then you can take that template and define it by TSS per day for your workouts and replicate that almost identically, perfectly every time you go to race. So that's one of the great tools about TSS and data is now, you're not sitting there thinking, oh, well, what did I do last time? Well, now you can actually plan it out according to numbers and say, no, this is the workout. This is the TSS number it needs to be relative to, where I'm at, and I'll come in and perform well. So it's really good at just defining the specifics of your taper, where you place your intensity and how much intensity is enough. In general, we do know that a bike in a 70.3 probably needs to be around 170 to 190 TSS. And if you fall in that range, you're pretty good. So you can go out and train and do workouts that put you in that 170 to 190 range and see, okay, how well do I run off that? Now, 170, 190 TSS range, that's just a TSS. It's not really indicative necessarily of how you do that. I mean, if you got the 100 TSS in the first hour, you pretty much are toasted. So it is important in how you train and race, but in terms of pacing and things. But it's a good way to get your body to know, okay, if I go out and I execute this workout that I think is specific to 70.3 intensity, and I finish with a range of about 170 to 190 from the TSS for the workout, then I know that I've prepared myself pretty well. And I know that if I come off that and I do a transition run and I'm successful, then I know that I'm preparing myself well for my racing. So you can do that for biking in 70.3 or Ironman. You just got a lot of different opportunities for that.
And the book has some specific numbers that I found really interesting, and any athlete that's planning a 70.3 or an Ironman can go and have a look at that. I'm sure that will be of much use for them. So other than the things that we've talked about now, or if there's something that you want to elaborate on further, talking about Triathlon 2.0 specifically, is there anything that you want to mention and tell the listeners about the book or about data-driven training in general?
Sure. I've been really pleased with the book and its reception. I think last I saw here in the States on Amazon, it had almost 20 reviews, and I think every one but one was a 5-star. So it's been exceptionally well received. It's being translated to Chinese and Spanish. I would expect it'll probably be translated to German soon. Run with Power has also is now being translated. Also, it's already been translated to German and is working on Spanish and Chinese as well. So I've been really pleased with the reception. At first when you write a book and you start putting a lot of numbers into it, there are a lot of numbers in that book. It took me 4 years to write that book, almost. The reason being because I wanted to give some sort of guidance in terms of metrics and values. So I would reach a point in the book where I would say, okay, well, it'd be really great if I could assign a number range for athletes here. But I didn't have it. So I'd have to go out and research it. And then I'd have to come back and add that. And then I'd move on in the book and come to the same thing. So I'm pretty confident in the numbers, but as the sport changes, more athletes come in, athletes get faster and better, new types of courses come in, things could change. So different types of athletes maybe come into the sport as well. So it's going to be, these numbers I don't think will always apply necessarily in 20, 25 years from now, but I think the processes that I introduce in the book of the way athletes can really step back and analyze their training and put a threshold. Well, okay, in the year that I did well, I reached this for my CTL for my bike. I reached this for my CTL for the run. And in the year that I didn't perform well, I reached a higher CTL for both those. Well, that tells you something. Maybe you overcooked yourself and overtrained, or maybe under. So I think it really gives athletes the tools to understand, here's what I need to go back and assess or see are my benchmarks, and how well does my success correlate with those benchmarks based on their age, their gender, and their goals. And once they have that, Now you start to really nail down training. You know exactly what type of training is you respond well to, maybe what you don't respond well to. You can set training goals a lot better and just much more clear. Now that you have a clear path, you're not questioning everything you do all the time. So, or you're not training according to peer pressure because your buddies are doing this ride every Saturday, so you're going to go do that. Now no, I'm not going to go do that. I'm going to go do the workout that matters for me, that helps me reach my goals and makes me successful. So I think that's the best part about the book, is it really gives athletes the tools to make them to know themselves better, understand how their training response is, and helps them be more successful because of it.
And please remind me to go and write another 5-star review on Amazon for your book, because I haven't gotten around to do it yet, but I'll do that.
All right. Well, thank you.
And you also mentioned your book, Running with Power, and I intentionally left it out from this interview because we could talk for so long about that as well. But so I'll link in the show notes to some other resources that you have on that you have written, and some interviews that you've done on Run with Power, so the listeners can look a bit more about that. But just very briefly, where do you think we are at the moment with Running with Power in terms of how close we are to really getting to be able to use it really effectively and benefit from it? Or is it something that you already recommend that triathletes start using right now?
Well, we're very close. I think that it really just depends on how successful you are in terms of actually recording data for yourself and then looking at it and seeing, okay, when I responded well to this type of training, what happened with my power values? What happened to my pace? The difference between, for those people that are unfamiliar, your listeners and watchers that are unfamiliar with power meters for running, it's not like cycling. It's not about how much power can I produce. Yes, the more power you produce, the greater work rate you can sustain. Chances are the better you'll be, or at least the longer you'll be able to hold that work rate. But it's more about speed per watt. How fast am I going for the speed that for the watts that I'm producing? So that relationship is critical, and that's really the big difference. When we ride a bike and we see a power meter, a power value on our bike, that bike is just telling us the power that's actually being utilized to move yourself forward. It's not, you're doing other work. There's absolutely more work that's going on, but what's being applied to the bike to move it successfully forward, that's what that power meter is showing you. So every watt that you see on your power meter on a bike is a good watt. It's an effective watt. In running, that's not the way it is. It's, you can have higher watts, but that doesn't mean you're running faster. We have different types of power: vertical power, lateral power, horizontal power. Well, you have to have some type of vertical power because you have to lift your body off the ground in order to run forward. If you don't come off the ground, you're not really running and you're not moving from the space. So now, but we all know when we have a lot of vertical oscillation, that's high vertical power. Well, at some point, that's not effective. That's not what we want. We just need enough vertical power. So I could jump up and down really high and have excellent power numbers, vertical power, but I'm not going anywhere. So my horizontal power is 0. So I'm not a very good runner. My pace is 0 because I'm not changing direction. I'm not really running forward. So that's kind of power meters in a nutshell for running. But what we are finding, and this is something that I've been writing about, I wrote it on Training Peaks, and I'm working a little bit more on it. I think there are some new ways that we can really, as we begin to learn some more things with this technology, and the technology has even changed since the book was published. I mean, not changed, but new metrics are coming out, and we're learning more in their application. I think power meters for running help really define intensity very well, because the work that you have to do is not just about the pace, but how hard you have to work to create that pace. And at some point, we all become exponential in the work required to increase pace. But it's just different for all of us where that is, even if our relative abilities are the same. So there's that. There's also, in what I wrote on Training Peaks, was we took Matt Russell, who was, I want to say Matt was 11th in Kona this year, and I think he was just 2nd in Cozumel, Ironman. We took his power file because he wore a stride unit, the foot pod. And it's interesting how he ran between 300 and 320 watts in both those races off the bike. That's pretty much where he stayed, right in that range. Paced himself very well with that. Now, so much of if any of your athletes train for an Ironman, they think, well, here's what I want to run off the bike, the pace that I want to run off the bike. Well, you don't really know what that pace is. And you can say, well, I want to run 4 minutes a K off the bike. Well, you can want to, but are you really going to do it? So many factors based upon the course, the intensity, the weather, the nutrition that you did will affect, how well you actually run off the bike. So what we've always tried to do is we've tried to define that intensity off the bike in terms of a pace. But there is no correlating pace. But if we look at it from a power value, Matt Russell knows if he goes out and runs between 300 and 320 watts on his long runs, that's specifically the intensity that he will run off the bike. And if he runs at that intensity and he finds like he's getting much more speed per watt in training at that small 20 watt range, well, I do believe that there is a direct correlation or training effect that he will run faster off the bike in Ironman if he does his long runs at that wattage range and improves his speed per watt. So that's just one example of where I think we're going. Now, does that mean every athlete needs to go out and run in those wattages? No, because those numbers are specific to Matt Russell. And the only reason I even know that is because I have the data from his races. So you have to, if you're an athlete, you have to go and collect the data and then come back and look at it and learn and see what you see. And then you have to make some conjectures and hypothesis and say, well, I think if I train like this, I should get this training effect. Is that really the case? We'll see. Stride is doing something too, where they're measuring the leg spring stiffness of an athlete. What we find are athletes that are fast runners have very high leg stiffness. And so one of the things I know I can tell you that we're doing with Ben Canute is we're using that. So far, I know USA Triathlon is certainly collecting that data on him to see, are we improving his leg spring stiffness? Because we feel that if we do, he'll be a better runner. So now it's still conjecture because this data is so new that I can't prove it yet. I just have to try and see over time. And that's the thing. So your original question was, are we there yet? Are there big breakthroughs and the ways to use this? The potential is extremely high. Are we there? I think we're 3-4 years away, but those that embrace it now and use it and leverage it can probably identify where the training response is coming and measure that training response in a new way. And if that's an effective way and they can find and prove that it's effective, well, now you can continue that type of training in order to know, instead of guessing, are we really improving? You can see it, and therefore, hopefully the results show.
It's exciting times for sure, and I'm sure that the triathletes that are collecting this kind of data can continue to follow your writing for Training Peaks and other triathlon media to see what the latest news on the subject is and how they can use it and improve their running from using the power data. So with that, let's move into the rapid fire question segment. Just 5 short questions with short answers. So are you ready?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
What's your favorite book, blog, or resource related to triathlon?
Believe it or not, they've been 2 of the books I've written. Triathlon Science I co-edited with Joe Friel, and I've used a lot of the things in that. I still keep that one, and even my book. I mean, the numbers that I found and the things in that I still keep right next to my desk and leverage. So it's funny. I find myself a lot of times like, yeah, I wrote about that somewhere. So I go through, there it is, table 5.1, page this, and a lot of times I'm talking to my athletes will have questions. I mean, there's so many numbers that have gone through my head that I don't even bother trying to keep them straight. So I keep those there. I also, let me think, I'm so big on mentality in athletes now. That I'm certainly reading some great books. A new book that I read recently was called Nerve, and it's about the science, the physiology of fear and things, and anxiety, and athletes and performance, and why do some people crumble in high pressure situations and others not. So I would say that's a great book as well.
Yeah, and when we had Joe Friel on a month or so ago, he said that the one thing that he wished he had done earlier in his career was learn more about sports psychology. So it's a really big and important topic. So what's your favorite piece of gear or equipment?
Oh, power meters. There's no doubt. There's just so much to learn from them, and great ways to compare different athletes. Everything I do is, even in my juniors. I mean, I still look at, okay, this was the front pack of the youth elite girls in the United States 3 years ago, and now I have new girls that come in, and I can see, like, the sport's changing. The sport is changing. The demands to stay at the front are increasing. So you can the things you learn from that are just incredible, and hopefully Run Power Meters will continue to do the same for us.
And what's a personal habit that's helped you achieve success?
Oh, just trying to be consistent, I would say, with what I do. I would say too, I've always, in everything that I've tried to do, I've always tried to be one step ahead. Not just saying, okay, we're great right here, but really trying to foresee what's the next change, whether it's in business, whether it's in data and technology, whether that's just everything. Even if my boys, raising my two sons, okay, they're here. What's the next thing I got to be prepared for them to do, me to be a better parent in that moment, all those things. And I think when you do that, you find you're probably never really satisfied, and you're always, when new things come along, you're more apt to learn. So,
yeah. And what's the hardest workouts you've done over the last 6 months or so?
Hardest workouts, boy, you're gonna make me feel lazy here. That's been the one great thing about retiring from professional racing, is I don't feel the need to go out and suffer anymore. Just some long rides, some running. I've hopped in a few 5Ks, 10Ks, and some things like that. CrossFit I did for a while. I don't know how many of your listeners done that. Let me tell you something. I've never done a 10, 15-minute workout that has absolutely blasted me like a CrossFit workout does. I ran track and cross country in college, and I could finish a mile no problem, but sometimes 5-10 minutes in a CrossFit workout, and I'm shaking the rest of the day. It's crazy. So those are some pretty intense ones too.
That's an interesting answer. And finally, what do you wish you had known or wish you had done differently at some earlier point in your triathlon career?
I wish I had adopted technology earlier, even in college when I ran. Really, instead of looking at my training log, going back and looking at my training log, and that was written words. If I had files, but I mean, we didn't even have GPS back then. When I was running in college in the 90s, so. If I would have been able to have some data like that in my early professional career, even my amateur triathlon racing career, I think I would have, I would have really seen where I was at, and had some cool stuff. A funny story, in 2007, I want to say 2006, I decided I needed to do something different in Xterra. I was racing Xterra against Conrad Stoltz and all these other guys. And then I was like, well, I'm never going to beat these guys, the Josiah Medaus and them, just racing the way they race. So I was like, man, there's got to be something I can do that's different, and mountain biking was kind of introducing all this new technology. And I was like, there's this new thing called a 29er. So I said, I think I'm going to go try this 29er wheel. And I'll never forget, I showed up to the race with a 29er mountain bike, and all those guys laughed at me. Conrad Stoltz, all of them just thought it was the funniest thing. Like, what are you doing? And I ended up double flatting in the race. And of course, since I'm the only one with a 29er, no one can toss me a tube or anything. And so I just laughed, and I was like, man, I really felt like that was going to be the advantage that I needed to offset. And lo and behold, here you go to a mountain bike race now or an Xterra, and if you see a 26-inch wheel, it's or a 650 for those that are international listeners. That's rare for a mountain bike now. Most of them are all the 700C 29ers, we call it. So the sport has definitely changed, and I think I was just a little bit ahead of my time with that, and probably didn't give it enough of a run. I kind of jumped off to Ironman, but to think, I mean, because the way that bike could accelerate or maintain a speed was, it couldn't accelerate as much, but man, it could just hold speeds that were way faster. So and even descending, it was better, all sorts of things. So that's kind of one of the things that I would say to wrap up. Always trying to foresee what the next step is, what the next tool is, what can I do to really break through. I think that was one piece of equipment that I was right on. I just didn't see it through enough.
Yeah. So Jim, thank you for coming on. This has been extremely interesting. Can you just end it off by telling the listeners where they can find out more about you and what you got going on? Anything you want to plug?
Sure. I am available. You can find me at coachvance.com. And I also do a podcast called Technology in Sports. I've got a new episode coming out next week. What we do is we actually look at what are the new companies, new breakthroughs, different things that affect sport, the way we approach sports, how coaches use certain technology or approach training. I've interviewed one of the strength and conditioning coaches of an NBA franchise. So just how they training all those different athletes and things and the stresses they deal with. So it's cool. It's been a cool undertaking, and I'm excited about the future of that one. And and like I say, the books will be translated here soon. And if people haven't gotten a copy, I'm sure they can find them Amazon or even through my website. So coachvance.com.
Okay, thank you again for coming on. It's been great. And to the listeners, we'll see you next week. So bye.
Thanks for having me.